Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Alex.
Today's another news episode, and the big news is that we are 4 weeks away from this Thursday from NFL kickoff, which I'm really excited for and ready for. The Lions and the Chiefs kick it off, and we're less than a month away now. As always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please subscribe to us on the socials. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and Threads with the handle at N2EFantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
Well, today we have our Hall of Fame game follow-up, and we can talk about some of the biggest bullet points from that game. We have Joe Burrow injury rumors and estimated timelines that we can talk about. We have wide receiver and running back and a quarterback signing from around the league. So we can discuss all of those as well as a suspension and injury news. So I don't want to get too specific until we just dive on in. So let's start with the Hall of Fame game, Jeff. That was the Browns versus the Jets. And I know that the Browns beat the Jets in a close one, but usually the wins don't matter that much in preseason. So, Jeff, what is some points that you thought were interesting? Like, what are things about this game that you keyed on?
So it looked like Dorian Thompson-Robinson looks like a real backup quarterback to Deshaun Watson. He looked really poised in the backfield. I don't think that he'll challenge Watson over the next several years for the job, but to have a rookie quarterback on a cheap contract to kind of offset what Watson is making will really help them out. And he's competing with Kellen Mond, who I actually really liked coming out of school, but he just never really lived up to the hype. And I'm hoping that the Browns here have at least a backup quarterback. I did also watch Tillman make a couple of grabs in the game, their rookie wide receiver. I also noticed that John Kelly started at running back for them, which is interesting. Does that mean that he's the backup running back? Does that mean they're keeping Ford out? What are your thoughts about all this Cleveland Brown news coming out of this?
So I really enjoyed Tillman getting a couple good grabs. He is a rookie that I really like, especially for Dynasty going forward. As far as Kelly, I think they were giving him a chance to get some run with the 2s and 3s to see what he could potentially provide the team. And I think he looked really good out there. Don't know whether it's something he would necessarily supplant Ford in yet, but he certainly looked good in this game and something to monitor going through the preseason. He'll probably make the roster at the very minimum. So I kind of like it. That's something to keep track of. I also thought that the Jets quarterback, Wilson, looked a lot more confident with Aaron Rodgers talking in his ear as he was playing. He had that nice deep ball, that 57-yard strike to Malik, which I thought was pretty good. It's nice to have football back. Like, it was nice to see that first game, and I can't wait for the games this week as well to start.
Absolutely. We get a full slate this week. I did notice Aaron Rodgers was doing some play calling. Is he auditioning for a job later in life?
I think potentially we'll see. He's most likely going to keep his options open. I think he could be a broadcaster. He could be a coach. Might be a part-time owner like Tom Brady. I don't know. We'll see.
Speaking of, I did hear that Tom Brady's ownership is in jeopardy right now, so he may not be able to become an owner in the NFL based on the current criteria. And I know the owner there, Davis, he put up a bit of a fight on that in the last owners meeting because the rule change came when the Washington Commanders changed ownership. So it still got passed, even though Mark Davis threw a bit of a fit, but Brady's ownership status is in jeopardy. I know because that was like a player owner question mark. The other thing is could you see someone being a coach owner potentially? Is that like a thing? Is that even like, or is that like a conflict of interest, or what would happen there?
I don't know. I was thinking about that as well. That's not one that I looked up, but I was just debating. Like, I would make Andy Reid a part owner if I was the Hunt family with Kansas City, but I don't know. That's something to ponder too.
Well, the Chicago Bears have already made Aaron Rodgers a part owner, so. All right. So moving on. So there's some Joe Burrow news that came out that's not really like definite, but his wide receiver, Jamar Chase, has a recommendation for him. What was that recommendation, Alex?
Well, Jamar Chase has come out saying that he intentionally sat out a couple games to make sure that he was healthy and ready to play at 100%. So he recommended to Joe Burrow to wait until week 5 to return to give himself time to recover from his calf injury, which to me, if that conversation even came up, that means that his calf injury is a little bit more severe than we thought it was, to even have that as a date thrown out there. So we've looked at a couple doctors out there that are commenting on this. I know that they're all eager to get their content and comment on this. And it seems like he might have a grade 2 strain if that date was even thrown out there, which would mean that should he come back at week 5 and sit out that entire time, his calf should have a minimal risk of re-injury. So that's what they're targeting. I don't know with how difficult their schedule is and how difficult their division is. If they can afford to have him out for 4 weeks, that will be kind of rough. They'd have to win most of their games, probably 80% of their other games to potentially sniff the playoffs. And if that's the case, I think I would have the Bengals further down on my standings than we initially projected. It's also important to note that on that injured play, he was already wearing a sleeve on that calf, so he could already have had an initial injury. He might have re-injured it, might have made it worse. It looks like he already tried playing on it. It didn't work out, so he might have to sit games. And I don't like that. He's my favorite quarterback in the league right now. I don't want him missing time. And Chase owners definitely don't want him missing time. Isn't that right, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting that Chase picked week 5. So that to me tells me that placing Joe Burrow on the PUP list to start the year to miss the first 4 games is on the table. Because it's really interesting that Jamar Chase didn't just say miss a few games to start the year and you come back when you're 100% healthy, but he actually put a number on it. And that number just happens to be the first game after the PUP list. I think if I was betting, though, I think Joe Burrow will be out there week 1, maybe not at 100%. And I think he realizes how competitive this division is. Because if I told you Cleveland finished in first place, if I told you Pittsburgh finished in first place, if I told you Baltimore finished in first place, I don't think very many people would be shocked about those. Now, I know that there's more likely that Cincinnati ends up number 1. But if Burrow misses the first 4 games, that busts open this whole entire division. And anyone could win it.
Yeah, that to me makes it more likely that Baltimore would get first in that division. And I think that you can definitely make a case between Cleveland or the Steelers as well to compete. It's a tough division. They can't afford to lose them for many games, and they certainly can't afford to lose them for the whole season. So that's the balancing act that they're going to have to roll with. I would guess, and totally guess, that he's not going to be on the PUP list, but he does miss maybe the first 2 weeks, just to make sure that he's a little bit more healthy when he plays. But I don't think that they can afford the full 4 games.
Absolutely. So we'll see, and it might cut down his ability to scramble, move in the pocket, but I don't really expect it to hamper his ability to throw. So he might have to play with some limitations for a few weeks while it fully heals. The only thing is like once we get past like week 5 or 6, how many players are 100% healthy at that point? And I would argue none of them. They're all nursing something. They're all getting healthy from something. They're all doing ice baths and just trying to stay as healthy as possible throughout the year. Because there's a lot of players that play hurt but not injured. That's just the course of the year item that players have to deal with.
All right, so we can move on to some news out in Seattle. Wide receiver Dwayne Eskridge has been suspended 6 games related to a domestic violence arrest. And I know when we were speculating on certain suspensions throughout the year that we have said in the past, it's been about 6 games for domestic violence. And sure enough, boom, 6 games for this case. And Jeff, I think you're the one who mentioned the 6 games to begin with. What do you think about this news? Probably this guy's out of the league, you think, this year?
Yeah, I think it's time to cut him in dynasty leagues. I know dynasty owners wanted to hold on to him because they thought either he would replace Lockett or Metcalf would move on, and neither of those items did happen. So it's probably time in dynasty leagues to cut Dwayne Eskridge. We don't really know much about the domestic violence arrest. It was kind of under lock and key. So I don't know if we're ever going to know the details of it. The NFL did move swiftly to suspend him 6 games. And because he's not a high profile player, I haven't heard any upheaval about this at all, about ease of 6 games. So that's an interesting little tidbit on this. Like, if it was a high profile guy, would it be different? Probably. So 6 games goes under the radar for a player like this.
Yeah, and that receiver group is already crowded with Lockett, Metcalf, and now JSN. There's not really much upside for him anyway, and he just ended his career basically, as far as I'm concerned, with this suspension. So,
yep, time to move on to better players.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, the Vikings have brought in their third first-round wide receiver in N'Keal Harry. He's clearly going to be a huge focal point to this offense. I mean, he's coming from a division rival. He was with the Bears a little bit last year. He failed out with the Patriots. Do you think he can survive even the preseason with Minnesota to potentially stay on this roster? What do you think the outlook is for N'Keal Harry with this team?
So I think Harry at best will be the 4th receiving option on the team. And I mean at wide receiver. I think that they have a good pass catching tight end, a good pass catching running back. So that probably bumps him to like the 6th actual pass catcher on the team. So I think Rager's ahead of him because I think Rager understands the playbook already. And I think there's a huge leg up with that. But I'm wondering what's happening to all of these wide receivers, of why they didn't stick with their initial team, especially first rounders, and kind of what's happening with that trend. This is Harry's 3rd team. As you mentioned, it's also the Vikings' 3rd first round draft pick. 4th.
It's actually 4th, isn't Rager? Wasn't he a first round pick too?
Yes, he went just before Jefferson.
Yeah.
Same draft. So this is their 4th. But what really disturbs me is it does not fit with the Vikings theme. Now, I'm going to coin this here on this podcast. The Vikings are now known as the Sons of Anarchy, because you've got Jefferson, you've got Hawkinson, you've got Madison, and you've got Addison. So the Sons of Anarchy are running wild, and the 2 that don't fit are KJ Osborne and N'Keal Harry.
Well, and Rager as well. So
who's that?
He's not gonna make it much longer. I don't know, man. I think it fits with the Viking thing, honestly, because that's what they did with their names. Literally the son of this person. But I don't know. You can go with Sons of Anarchy. I like just the Viking theme in general.
Hey, it just came to me when I was looking at their last names, and I was like, this is kind of a theme. All right. So moving forward, about the Vikings, their former quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, finally signs with a team. He signed yesterday with the Detroit Lions. Now, I believe this slots him into the backup role, but do you see him having any fantasy relevance this year?
I don't. I think that he's a very solid backup to have just in case something happens to Goff. I think he's also a nice bridge quarterback for their rookie there that they just drafted out of Tennessee, Hendon Hooker. I think it's just solid overall depth move, good insurance for Goff. I don't think that he sees the field, though. I think Goff stayed pretty healthy throughout his career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he might get 1, maybe 2 starts this year if Goff can't play a game, but that's about it. And I think he'll be a good mentor to Hendon Hooker as well as the bridge that you had mentioned, the Bridgewater to that.
I want to circle back to the Vikings name thing. I think it should be called Cousins and Sons.
All right. Cousins and Sons. I got it. Done and done. So that is going to be their new name going forward. Yeah, we have a ton of running back news coming up. So we have a bunch of free agent signings, and we're going to start the first one with the Indianapolis Colts. Alex, who did the Indianapolis Colts bring aboard?
It brought in a very familiar fantasy name in Kenyon Drake. His last stint was filling in for Baltimore, filling in for J.K. Dobbins with his injury, and he actually did pretty well over the course of 4 games. So he, despite being, I think, 29, is still looking like he can contribute to a game. And him being this big of a relatively big fantasy name really puts the question whether or not Jonathan Taylor misses any time this year. So it's got me a little bit more worried. I still think Jonathan Taylor probably plays, but I'm a little bit more cautious with this signing. Jeff, do you think this impacts Taylor at all? Do you think this showcases the Colts' plans? Or do you think it's just a solid backup? What do you make of this move?
So their depth chart, I was going to ask you about this and how you see it shaking out. It does appear that Jonathan Taylor will not go on the NFI list, which means that he will be part of the Colts plan this year. His absence from today's practice was excused because he's getting treatment on the ankle that he injured last year. So it does seem like we're on track towards something Jonathan Taylor happening as we go along. So I do think Jonathan Taylor ends up being the running back 1, but I do think the running back 2 slot on this team is completely wide open. They have Kenyon Drake, who could slide into that role as a veteran. They have, is it Evan Hall as an option to be the rookie that comes in and dominates. They have Deion Jackson returning. They also have Zach Moss that will be ready by week 1 from his broken arm. So they have a lot of options at running back 2. Currently, I have Zach Moss penciled into my RB2 slot, and that's only because he is very familiar with the system after being traded midseason last year. Now he's had a whole offseason to review the playbook, get up to speed. But Zach Moss in Buffalo never lived up to his potential hype. So it's very possible that Zach Moss falls off of the roster. I just think they have 4 guys that are very similar in talent. And obviously we don't know what Evan Hall is yet. It does seem like the Colts and Deion, and I should clarify, Deion Jackson had a few good games last year. So probably behind Moss, he would probably be the 3rd, and then you would slot in Drake and then the rookie right now. But the rookie could move up relatively quickly, and Drake could find himself off the roster depending on what happens. So Drake's kind of facing an uphill battle to learn a playbook and move up the roster in relative short order.
So if I was going to rank them right now, like we're at this moment in preseason, obviously Jonathan Taylor, number 1, clear number 1 if he's healthy and they work out their issues, number 1. Kenyon Drake to me would immediately slot in number 2. Zach Moss, if he's healthy, would slot in number 3, and Evan Hull would slot in number 4. I don't think that Deion Jackson did enough last year to stick around on this team. He definitely has to prove it. They also have Jake Funk, who I don't think is going to be on the roster past preseason. So that's the order that I would have right now, and I could see a path for Evan Hull to rise up this list to number 3 this year and potentially higher the following year. It really depends on what happens with Jonathan Taylor. So that's stuff to keep an eye on. They could obviously move on from Zach Moss once he comes back from his injury, or waive him with an injury settlement. I just think in preseason they'll probably hold on to him.
Yeah, I think this is completely up in the air, though, and it'll be really interesting to see how they use them in the preseason. This will be a backfield that I'm watching, especially if anyone's worried about Taylor and his injury and his contract situation and his overall availability for the season. All right, so we have one more big team to discuss, and we're going to discuss it all together here, and that is another suspension, and it is with the Saints running back Alvin Kamara. He's been suspended for 3 games, which is below the threshold for domestic violence, because this is not domestic violence. This is not like anything against a female or child. So roughly what we thought, does this hurt or help his draft stock with you? Because I'm assuming you baked in some suspension into his ranking.
Well, yeah, we were close with 2. It ended up being 3, like you said. It really doesn't move him much, but it definitely makes me feel better knowing that it's decided and exactly what it is. So I don't think he's moved for me yet. He's still outside my top 24. It's hard to be in my top 24 if you miss 3 games. But once he does come back, if you look at points per game, once he's playing, it's much higher than where he's going to be drafted in drafts. So if it's something where you can have a plug-in or placeholder for the first few weeks and then bring in Kamara week 4, it's definitely worth taking. And Jeff, I know he's someone that you like to target. So how do you feel about Kamara getting that suspension?
So I had some of the suspension baked into this because he was my 15th projected running back, and I bumped him down to 15th in rankings because I was baking in a little bit of suspension. He's still my 21st ranked running back right now. And if I'm looking at like my overall, that probably makes him like a 6th rounder or a 7th rounder, depending on the league size, the positions that go ahead of him. but I still wouldn't hesitate targeting him later in drafts, especially as we get towards that 7th and 8th round, as people start to get further and further away from Kamara. Then that's when I would grab more shares of him, because I do believe down the stretch with Derek Carr, Captain Checkdown, he could make it work there. Could be a steal late too.
Yeah, that's certainly something that you're banking on. I might get him if he falls really far in drafts, but
What round would you feel comfortable grabbing Kamara? Right now, before the suspension was announced, he was going in the 7th round.
I think 7th or 8th round, I might feel comfortable, especially if I already have 1 or 2 running backs already on my roster.
Imagine going a 0 RB and grabbing Kamara in the 7th round.
I know. People would never believe that if you said that 2 or 3 years ago.
Exactly. And I don't know if his ADP will go up or down from this 3-game suspension, because I don't know what people were expecting from the suspension of Kamara.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think that he's disappointed the last couple years, and I think people are just bringing those feelings over into this year as well as the suspension. I think that 3 games though is a decent chunk, and that's the first 3 weeks of the year, so that's kind of scary.
He actually raised up to a 6-rounder after his suspension.
Well, that's good.
So he's going 62 overall.
I think he'll rise to like round 5 or 4 by the time I do my redraft leagues.
Probably. Right now he's going between Delvin Cook and DeAndre Swift. So gives you something to think about.
I think he should be higher than those 2 guys.
Right.
Personally.
I think the suspension hurts people because you take 0 points for those first 3 weeks.
Also in that running back group, we have Eno Benjamin, who tore his Achilles and will miss the entire 2023 season. That's someone that I liked the potential upside, but he ended up bouncing around before getting this injury. So it's not looking good for his career. He's probably going to, like we pointed out with other guys, it takes 2 or 3 years to come back from an Achilles, unless randomly you're Akers. So I don't think, from what I've researched with these different sports medicine doctors, is that there's no magic treatment that recovers an Achilles. It's all individual based, and there's no explanation for Akers' recovery. There's no special tricks that they did. So I wouldn't expect a quick turnaround like that. I'd expect more of a Donta Foreman situation where it takes a while to come back, which is unfortunate. He's someone that I previously liked. It's not good news, and it looks like the Saints are looking to bring in another running back to replace him. So, Jeff, what do you think about Eno, and who is this other running back that's resurfacing?
Well, so I think they were going to keep Eno on the roster with Kamara being suspended, because that doesn't take a roster spot. So that is something that I think that he was going to make the roster. He's 24 years old. So in, let's say, 2 years, let's say it takes 2 full years to recover from this completely. And I think Akers, while he did come back, I don't think he was the same running back that he was prior to the injury. And I think he's just getting back to that towards the end of last season. So I do think that just because Akers hit the field quicker doesn't mean that he was actually effective either. And I think he actually hit some effective milestones at the end of last season. But Benjamin's 24, so he could return by 26 to full form and have like a good 2 to 3 year stretch with running the football. So not all is lost with him. And we always hear running backs resurface. We saw it happen with Foreman. Like, Foreman was pretty much out of the league, but Benjamin's another one. Hopefully he'll return to form. The worst injury to get as a running back is turning out to be the Achilles, not the ACL that's dreaded that we're waiting for Breece Hall, and we're also watching Javonte Williams come back from. So this is the career shortener, not the career killer, but it definitely shortens the amount of years that you can make money in this NFL. So just an interesting thought. So turning over now down 2 running backs, turning a page here. Now they've brought in Kareem Hunt, and he is going to sign with the team pending a physical. So that means that Kareem Hunt will probably fill in for the Alvin Kamara role for the first 3 games. And then I don't know what happens to Hunt's spot once Kamara is back, because if they're not going to give it right back to Kamara, why not just cut Kamara now and just get him off of the roster? Hunt might only be a 3-game guy for the Saints, and it's very possible that they pay him for the entire season because veterans get their salary guaranteed after the first game. And then he gets cut after the third game because they have Jamal Williams, who has a very set role on the team, I believe. And then we also have Kendre Miller, the rookie, who I believe is going to need some time to come up to speed and be able to contribute to this offense. So I don't think Miller was going to have a huge role this year, but this kind of solidifies what the Saints are looking for, because I believe that Hunt replaces Kamara's receiving skills on the team. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, I see the parallels. He has very similar game to Alvin Kamara. Obviously, he doesn't look like he has the quickness that Alvin Kamara has, but I can see him as a 3-game filler. I can see him as a permanent backup throughout the year, because if they were going to carry 4 running backs anyway, why wouldn't they keep Hunt for the rest of the year? They could always potentially trade him mid-year if he looked good in his stint and if other teams have injuries. I do think that Kendre Miller is still a little bit banged up. I don't think he's 100% either. So they are hurting for some running backs to put out there. And I agree that Kareem Hunt is going to play the Kamara role until Kamara comes back. You also need insurance if Kamara comes back and all of a sudden gets hurt his first game back. You definitely need someone who can fill in that same role. Ultimately, it looks like a crowded backfield to me. I do think that Kareem Hunt, even if his athleticism has declined, I think that he is still a better back at this point than Inu Benjamin was. So it's a net improvement, in my opinion, if they end up bringing him on.
Yeah, we will see what happens there, but there's been a little bit of a running back carousel in New Orleans right now, where they're trying to figure out who's going to run the football on what downs, but it does seem like very specific roles to me.
It looks like some other running back news out there. It looks like there is finally some movement on the free agents Dalvin Cook and Zeke Elliott front. We have some teams that are certainly becoming the front runners for these guys and some teams that are out on these guys. It looks like the Patriots are officially out on Dalvin Cook and are looking into Zeke Elliott. So that will be interesting to if that materializes. And it looks like Dalvin and Miami is finally heating back up, and they may be gearing up for another offer. Jeff, what do you think about those spots for these guys? Do you think that there's other teams that are still in the mix for these guys? What's the outlook? What do you think?
So I said yesterday, and I'm going to repeat it today, that I believe the longer that free agent running backs stay on the market, now that we're hitting preseason games, the longer or the less they'll actually contribute to an offense significantly this year. And I think Cook is looking for a role and money. Elliott kind of is doing that too, but I think Elliott's realized his market hasn't been as great as he would have liked it. And there is a lot of interest between Elliott and the Patriots because they do like his pass blocking skills, and they're actually pretty elite if you look at them. And that is something that not only could it help the Patriots, but it could help Stevenson kind of learn from Elliott kind of what to look for. And I do think that they're kind of similar style runners. I do think Stevenson will not see the bench any more than he saw last year with Elliott on the team. I would assume Elliott would assume the Harris role, maybe even to a lesser extent. But I don't think it ever hurts to bring in a veteran guy to kind of coach up the younger backs in the room. And there's a lot of younger backs in New England. Now, Cook is anyone's guess. He's flirting with Miami. He's flirting with the Jets. Jets sounded like they wanted to sign him, but Cook wasn't ready to sign anywhere. And I think it's because he's not getting the money that he thinks that he deserves. But I do think the Jets really want to bring in a player like Dalvin Cook because they do face a nightmare beginning part of the schedule. And I think adding an extra running back where they can ground and pound could take some pressure off of that offense that's going to need some time to get going, get clicking. I do think the Jets have done everything right this offseason about Rodgers, bringing in Lazard, bringing in Cobb, bringing in players where he knows where they'll be immediately day one. And then that could also help Wilson and Davis and Hardman get used to where Aaron Rodgers wants them to be. So like there isn't so much pressure on day one for those players to get it. So I do think they've done everything right so far to make Rodgers comfortable. I think one more running back like that could make him more comfortable. I don't like what that does to Breece Hall's stock this year.
Yeah, I don't think that Brees Hall is going to have the big year that everyone hoped. I think it's probably better for him in the long run to have another back take some of the carries and some of the grind on the season this year. I'm going to be much higher on Brees Hall probably next season. I still think Miami's in the mix. I don't think that they have someone who can run between the tackles like Dalvin Cook can. I think that most of their guys are outside runners or scat backs or receiving backs. I don't think that they have everything they need to try to compete with the Bills or with now the Jets with Aaron Rodgers there. So I still think that Miami and the Jets are really the only two teams right now that are interested in Dalvin Cook. Zeke, it seems like it's only the Patriots right now. I haven't heard any other team. Obviously, like you said, with them being they like his pass blocking ability. They saw him play center his very last snap of the year with Dallas, and they're like, oh, he can play center and he can play offensive line for us as well as running back. That's
His career
clearly it.
cannot end
But
like that.
but they definitely need someone to play smash mouth football and balance out Ramondre Stevenson. They let Damian Harris go to a division rival. So I think they will miss someone who's a big body back. And I think he'd be a good backup for Ramondre. So those are interesting fits. I don't think that Zeke will get that big of a contract with New England, though. They seem to be penny pitchers when it comes to the running back position.
Yep, and it's worked out really well for them because I don't think they've ever like needed a running back. We've never said that they were like a running back wasteland, even from probably the last 20 years. They've had at least somebody that is serviceable at the running back position for both real football and for fantasy football.
All right. Well, that about does it for this news episode. So thank you guys for downloading or listening to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Please do not forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
As always, you can find us with our handle at N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, and Threads. Please give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.